If more people with big hearts aren't in tech, I kind of wonder what will become of the world. And so that's really why I ended up wanting to be a leadership coach for women in tech.
I'm going to move the conversation a little bit to something you said earlier that I think is mainly very common in tech companies and startups versus like traditional companies. And that is like stock options, right?
Yeah, I think, again, like finding the right context and people to surround yourself with is going to be really important. The question then becomes, do you want to work at a startup or do you want to work at a public company? And if you want to work at a public company, you can easily look with what their market cap is, which is just the valuation of that company on the public market.
All right, welcome back to this episode of the How to Get a Job podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about women in tech and to talk about this amazing industry and amazing I think the industry of tech, we all know why we want to go into tech. It's innovative, but also very lucrative. I have Shab. Shab is a career and leadership coach for women in tech. Shab, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Happy Wednesday or whatever day it is when you're listening to this. It's a great day to be alive.
It is. Shab, thank you for being here. I know we kind of talked in a networking call last week, and then I was like super excited to have you on the podcast. I love the experience that you have, working for tech companies, working for Uber, and you've even worked for Deloitte. You have such a great career. But how did you get started in tech? Did you always know you wanted to do tech, or how did you end up in tech?
Yeah, so my mom and dad were both engineers in Silicon Valley. They immigrated to this country from Iran in the 70s as students. They couldn't go home because of the revolution, and they just happened to be nudged into studying a brand new major that was at their university called computer science. And kind of the rest is history. They moved out to the Bay Area, and I just grew up in the industry, for lack of a better term. I learned so much about how to build wealth from them. And for me, I always knew I wanted to be in technology, not because of necessarily just getting equity, which I think is really important if you want to build long-term generational wealth, but also because of the impact it has on the world. I worked at Uber, which is like everybody uses Uber all over the world now. Everybody uses Uber Eats, and even some of the more actual high tech we use in our day to day, and it has such an impact on our life. So that's a main reason I wanted to get into that industry. And if more people with big hearts aren't in tech, I kind of wonder what will become of the world. And so that's really why I ended up wanting to be a leadership coach for women in tech, because we see that the attrition rate is really high. It's like half of women leave before they're 35.
They leave tech before they're 35?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
So I think a lot of us, first of all, want to have families, and it's like usually working in a pressure cooker like environment. We don't feel valued at the end of the day. There's not a ton of support for being a mom in this industry, and it's so, fast paced. So a lot of women end up deciding, hey, I want a slower pace of life, and they end up wanting to leave because it's just not supportive.
And so do you think that it becomes then harder for women to get into those top leadership roles in tech? And if so, like, what are some of the things that women can be doing early in their career to set them up for success?
So, yeah, less than 25% of women in the tech industry end up becoming leaders. I think the best thing you can do early in your career is actually finding a good mentor and a sponsor to help you grow. Because if you're not on the same page as your manager or their manager, it's going to be really hard for you to start developing your career and getting to those top levels, right? Having a supportive manager and being in the right environment is even more important than getting paid fat stacks like early on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do. And you mentioned two things, or I think even three things. And I would love if we maybe dive into the differences of, like you said, you have a manager, you have a mentor, and you have an advocate.
Yeah. Yeah. So a manager obviously has direct impact on your career, right? They're the ones who are going to be talking about you in those calibration conversations when you're having your performance reviews. They're the ones who are giving you regular feedback, and they're the ones who are ultimately going to go to bat for you. Um, Having a mentor is great if you really know what you want to do in your career and you have someone that's maybe 5 steps ahead of you. Sometimes that can be your manager, especially if you're working with someone who's like a director level plus, and you're still a little bit more junior. That's also a great option. But I mentioned having a sponsor, and a sponsor is really the one who is going to move you up in the company. It doesn't necessarily need to be your direct manager, but if you are not building relationships with leadership and getting to know a lot of different folks at your company, you're really limiting your opportunity for finding someone who is really going to invest in you long term.
Yeah. I want to move the conversation a little bit to something you said earlier that I think is mainly very common in tech companies and startups versus like traditional companies. And that is like stock options, right? So
Yeah.
I work with a lot of international STEM students, and their majority of them are hired by like tech companies, and even particularly even bigger tech companies like like the Magnificent Seven or Mag or Fang or whatever we're calling them at the time, right? And I see that they're very lucrative stock options. Where when I worked at PepsiCo, that wasn't even part of the compensation package. Why do you think tech companies offer such big equity stakes, or not even like dollar amounts or equity? And should you consider that when you're looking for jobs, or knowing that a lot of times you won't even get to the vested area time and leave before that?
Well, no, I think people do end up vesting because the vesting schedule for a lot of these companies are on a year over year basis. So you stay a year and then every month you end up vesting is pretty common. But yeah, I think everyone should try and get equity in a company. That's my philosophy, and that's what I was taught from my parents. It just changes the game, and yeah, a lot of these bigger companies that are a bit more established, you're not going to offer you as much equity. But if you're in tech, the reason they offer that is because they want you to have skin in the game. They want you to feel like an owner of the company so that you are actually putting in more hours, more effort, and you really care about maximizing impact and growth, and finding competitive advantage. Another reason they do this is because a lot of these tech companies early on, they're not trying to maximize salary. And so they offer equity packages that are quite considerable because they say, hey, this is going to be a unicorn in 5, 10 years potentially. The risk obviously is that startup could fail.
Yeah.
So you might have $0. And so I think the sweet spot is finding maybe a unicorn company that's still private, that still offers pretty good compensation packages, with like a large equity component.
I think it's super interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of the podcast My First Million.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, and so they talk a lot about uh one of one of the hosts, his wife created a list of 10 companies that like everyone should look into starting their career. I think she called it the Lisa list or the Angie list. And they had this criteria of companies that weren't too big, where like the upside is not necessarily there, but companies that can 1000x the valuation. So like there's some criteria where it's like, hey, they have a proven business model, so there's some traction. They have anywhere between, I think the sweet spot is like over 100 employees, but not more than 1,000 employees. So they had found this criteria, and then they were saying that if you can get a job in one of these 10 companies, you would have actually be a multi-millionaire and within like 5 years. And it would be like the best way for you to have invested your time in your mid 20s to early 30s.
Yeah. No, that's smart. I think that's the right criteria. It doesn't have to be a seed stage startup. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to even be Series A. But getting in early enough where you're actually like really having a significant impact on the business is a really important part of it. But also knowing, does this have even product market fit? Like, do people even want this service? I think that's or product. I think that's a big piece of it too. And I think that gets overlooked a lot of the time because we're just looking at who the founder is. But and that's an important piece of signing up for a lot of these tech companies. Do you believe in the leadership? Because I mean, we see it time and time again. They get kicked out eventually by their boards. That
Yeah.
happened at Uber when I was there. It
Yeah.
was like Travis got kicked out um, in the first 6 months I was there, and it went through a radical leadership change and the board changed. And it was a great time to observe all of that, but it does change a lot of the culture.
It's super interesting. I watched Supercharged last year, the show. I don't know
Oh,
if you
super
remember.
pumped.
I
Yeah.
was super pumped, and that was super interesting. I have a question for you. I know that so you've been a woman in tech. Your mom came from women in tech. What advice do you have for women earlier in or mid in their careers that want to be successful in tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like finding the right context and people to surround yourself with is going to be really important. I think a lot of times we don't know what we want to do or what our strengths are, and we kind of just pick a path. A really great leader and manager is going to be able to not only find you the right path forward, which was the case that I got to experience. I worked for an amazing leader who said, "Hey, you're kind of working on this kind of work, and that's probably not what's going to let you stand out and build your resume up here. Let's move you into a different kind of type of work." And I ran with it, and it did end up working out for me.
Yeah.
And so having someone, instead of saying, "Hey, you suck at this job and you're not going to be successful at this company," versus having a leader who's going to grow and develop you and that you have a good relationship with, I think is my number one tip. Um, my number two tip, which is not necessarily totally career focused, but is financial focused. And this is not financial advice, so don't sue me or something. Um, is just start investing, no matter if you have equity or not. Just start investing your money early on when you're 21, 22, because over the lifetime of that investment, you're going to essentially make millions of dollars down the line, especially in your retirement. You just put it away and invest that money in something basic and don't touch it. And in 40, 50 years, you're going to be a multimillionaire. And I think that type of advice sometimes gets lost in the sauce.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Question for you. So when looking for a job in tech, how how much does proximity to being in Silicon Valley affect the type of job or career that you can have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think New York is also becoming a great hub, and Miami is becoming a hub for tech, as well as Austin. So I think it's becoming more distributed. You're going to
Mm.
have the most opportunities at startups in Silicon Valley, though. Um, I think with remote work, it's becoming a bit easier. But I think if you really want to be in tech and meet founders and, you know, build something, being in Silicon Valley or San Francisco is going to be, just a lot more helpful for your career. It's not the end all, like Seattle, Austin, New York, Miami, even Toronto are becoming hubs for tech. So it's not impossible, but being in a major city is always going to be helpful.
Yeah. And I guess the following question for you is that like if aside from knowing the big tech companies, right, like the Googles, the Apples of the world, what are some other type of companies or where should I look into applying for tech companies that are not like the big ones? Is there like a sweet spot of middle-sized companies or like what would be the biggest difference? Like how do I find these companies if I'm not in Silicon Valley?
Oh, well, I think there's the question then becomes, do you want to work at a startup or do you want to work at a public company? And if you want to work at a public company, you can easily look with what their market cap is, which is just the valuation of that company on the public market. Just Googling all of these places, looking in the technology sector stocks to see what's growing. Like Nvidia is an amazing company that's just like, I mean, grown exponentially is the best way for me to put it over the last 5, 6 years because their chips are in everything and their chips are powering a lot of this AI boom that we're seeing. Um, Is that one of the fangs? I don't know. Maybe it is one of the ends. I feel like it was Netflix, but maybe it's gotten replaced with
I
Nvidia.
think it's called a magnificent. Like right now,
Oh, because the
Nvidia
app is not Facebook anymore, right?
is called Magnificent Seven, and so it's like this seven stock, which Nvidia is in one of them.
Okay, great.
Yeah, there's always changing the acronym anyway, so I don't even know. Can't keep up. I'm not in tech.
I know it's like always changing, but yeah, like Nvidia, I don't know, it was not on anybody's radar because it's not really a consumer product unless you were actually a gaming nerd and you knew about like chips because it made your PC run really fast so you could play like whatever Call of Duty or whatever other game. I'm not going to pretend I know, but yeah, I think that's one for public companies. For private companies, I love Well Found. It used to be Angel List. And Angel List it's like a job board for private companies. It actually shows what the equity package would be that you could potentially get for that specific role. And they list all of the, the mission. You can filter really well there, but just exploring what's out there is like the best way to figure out what kind of companies even exist, because you'd be surprised. There's just so much in like food tech, health tech, ed tech, like there's just fintech. There's so many adjacent tech companies now.
Shab, question for you as we kind of wrap it up is what advice do you have for women looking to break into tech?
So I think the thing to know about tech is they're less focused on your degree and more focused on the impact you can potentially make at the company. And so even if you didn't go to like an Ivy League school or a top 10 whatever school, don't worry about that, but make your resume and your story super impact driven so that you are highlighting the skills that you've learned at whatever company and that you're bringing it to the tech industry. That's exactly what I did when I pivoted from working at Deloitte to working at Uber. It was a full-on pivot. I was doing a completely different job, but what I led with was the skills that I learned and the impact that I could drive for this company. And if they're hiring like crazy or they're early enough and they're growing a business unit, they're going to want to know about that impact because 9 times out of 10, they know people haven't done the job yet.
That's great. If women in like are looking to learn more about like breaking into tech, or maybe they're in tech now, but they feel like they've hit a plateau and they want to work with a coach or a mentor like yourself, what would be the best way to get a hold of you or connect with you? And also, what are some of the products and services that you provide?
Yeah. So the best way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn. I'm very active there every day. You can reach out to me on a DM or read my content. And I have a newsletter if you want one more thing in your email inbox. I promise it's worth it. It's called Strategic and Promoted. And then 2, I have a couple of different packages. I help women land new roles with my Career Clarity coaching package. And then if you are in a role and you're just like, I want to be more successful and get to the next level, I have a workplace navigation package that helps you do just that. That's called S&P 100, my Strategic and Promoted 100 Days package to help you navigate the next quarter in your career so that you're setting yourself up for success.
I love it. I will put a link to your LinkedIn here so they can connect with you. Thank you so much for doing this. This has been amazing. If you're listening to this and you know someone that is looking to break into tech or maybe in tech and can use this advice, please don't forget to share this podcast, like, subscribe. I appreciate you all so much and catch you guys on the next episode. Bye, everyone.